So today we're just going to go through some tips for the exam, just general tips. So we'll start with some tips that VCAA generally give. Number one, and I think we've mentioned this a few times, is that usually when you get the exam, there are two kind of black shaded bits on each side of each page, which say do not write on this page. So I think that advice is kind of pretty straightforward. Don't write too close to that line or too close to the edge of the page, because as you guys know, the paper gets scanned. They don't mark the physical copies of the exam booklets like they used to. So they scan the copies through for short answer section as well. So just make sure you don't go right to the end of the, like too close to that black line, because that might not get scanned or your answer might get cut off. Also, if your answer is long or you're exceeding the number of lines that are given in a question, do continue your answer in the extra space at the back of the booklet. There'll be an extra page. And just clearly indicate what answer you're continuing. So for example, if you're continuing, let's say question 2A in the normal exam booklet, okay, you've run out of space, just say continued at back. Okay, and then when you flip to the last page, we should be able to see 2B and then the continuation of that answer. So make it clear for your assessor, sorry, not 2B, 2A.
Yeah, 2A.
The continuation of that answer, yeah. So that's the basic idea. Just make it clear for the assessor where the rest of your answer is. Also, just avoid padding information or padding responses, which is basically fluffing up your answers with unnecessary information or unnecessary opening sentences that don't actually add any substance to your answer and will literally just take up your writing time as well as your space. Or the lines that you're given. So just avoid that. Always read the question directly and then directly answer the question. So you might highlight key things that are being asked in the question and just keep looking back to your answer to make sure you're not going off track. The third point is that you need to ensure you make reference to the scenario. I think me and Miss B have tried our best this year to train you guys for the scenario-based questions. Okay, always telling you guys, don't make your answer general, always make it specific to the scenario. That could include discussing, not just basic information like the name of the person, but also details about their situation. So for example, if someone is going through Parkinson's disease in a scenario and it's mentioned things like motor symptoms, if you start talking about the motor deficits or the motor impairments, you might bring in the specific symptoms that were mentioned in the scenario. So if the person in the scenario was said to be experiencing tremors, you might include that in your answer. You might say Parkinson's disease is characterized by a number of motor symptoms, such as the tremors that are experienced by Frank in the situation or in the scenario. So just make sure you do that. And remember, general answers or general responses don't usually achieve full marks. They usually achieve like just 1 mark maybe. So if it's a 2-mark question, you might get 1 out of 2. Sometimes they're just worth 0 as well. So just be careful there. Spelling errors. So VCAA's general advice on spelling errors is that if you've made a general spelling error for a general word, that's not a psychological key term, you're not going to get penalized for that. But if it's the spelling of a scientific or psychological term, like glutamate or, excitatory or inhibitory, those are kind of words that are more keywords. And so those should be spelled correctly, particularly if the whole question is asking you to name the keyword. So if it's like, name the neurotransmitter that plays a key role in synaptic plasticity, and then they've given you 1 line and it's worth 1 mark. If you then don't spell glutamate correctly, or you spell it so badly that it resembles another word, you will get 0 marks for that. So just be careful there. Also, always unpack or do not repeat keywords in your responses. So we always ask you guys to unpack the word. So when we talk about something like an inhibitory neurotransmitter, you shouldn't say it simply inhibits neural activity, but unpack that, go further. So you might say, for example, it blocks neural activity or it hinders neural activity. Similar, to the stages of observational learning, when we talk about attention, we always tell you guys to unpack that. We say, talk about how the person doesn't just pay attention, but that they, for example, focus on the behavior, that they, sit back and note down the behavior. Okay, so that could be how you unpack that. Also, depending on the keyword that you're being asked or the question command term, if it's distinguish, you want to maybe use a linking word like on the other hand, in contrast, in comparison, to just to give you like a sample question. If they asked you to, for example, distinguish between conscious and unconscious, whoops, where's my thing gone? And unconscious responses, you might say something like, okay, conscious responses refer to responses that are voluntary and goal-directed in nature, whereas, or on the other hand, unconscious responses involve behaviors that involve little conscious awareness or that are more involuntary in nature. Okay, so just using linking words like that can help to show that you're kind of fulfilling that question command term there. Okay, so that's some general VCAA exam tips and advice for generally the overall exam and approaching certain questions. And now let's look at some advice on how to utilize reading time. So in general, for how we talk about or how we would utilize reading time, you're going to use reading time to basically mentally map out or plan what you might include. If you are reading through the MCQs like one by one, sometimes you get a first instinct as to what the answer is. So keep that first instinct at the back of your mind. And I think this is particularly the case, for example, when we're marking your SAC, sometimes you've actually circled the correct answer A in the beginning, and then you've crossed it off and gone and circled B. So if you just stuck to your first instinct, you would have actually gotten that correct. So just remember your first instinct is often usually correct. So just try to like have faith in that and stick to that. Don't overanalyze, and especially the second time you go around, if you have time and you're proofreading, don't like second guess yourself too much, because sometimes it does lead to you getting MCQs wrong. Another thing that you need to remember is that when you're reading through the scenarios in either section A or section B in reading time, focus on any important concepts that kind of pop out or that stick out to you. So for example, if a scenario is talking about this fact that there's a piling up of stresses, or that there's a combination of stresses that, I don't know, Emma is going through in her life, just keep the word kind of cumulative risk at the back of your mind. If it talks about a person not having belief in themselves or their ability to get a good ATAR, think about the word poor self-efficacy. So think about these key words and basically how they might show up in certain questions. Again, like Ms. B said before, sometimes these things just kind of stay in your subconscious, and when you come back to the questions later on, you know, you remember them better and you're able to use that information there. Most importantly for reading time, try to spend a few minutes to actually look at that 10-marker question and basically plan out what you might write about or what ideas you might include. Even if you're just planning how you might structure that out in terms of what subheadings you might include, or basically what kind of points you might include, or what topics you might talk about, that can also help. We'd especially encourage you guys to use reading time to have a bit of a look at the 10-marker, because remember, the 10-marker is the last question on the exam. By the time you get to it, you might not have a separate time that you're able to allocate in writing time to then start planning or thinking about or reading it properly. So it's a good idea to use those 15 minutes that you have in reading time to kind of really do a good examination of that 10-mark question. Okay. Although reading time is 15 minutes, don't feel like you have to use every single millisecond of that 15 minutes actively doing mental planning, because look, you don't want to exhaust yourself out even before writing time begins. If you think that you'd prefer to just spend that time maybe skimming through the exam, or just deeply breathing, or doing that breathing retraining to, you know, get into the zone to calm down your nerves, just do that. You might choose to maybe spend 10 minutes reading time and just 5 minutes calming yourself down. It's up to you. And at the end of the day, you just want to be in a good state of mind and a good zone for when you actually start your writing time. Okay. This is one personal tip that I've included. This is what I did when I did the exam many years ago. And I think a lot of people do this as well. In the last minute or so before reading time is over, just start rehearsing or repeating to yourself the first few answers to maybe the first 4, 5, or 6 multiple choice questions, remembering that our short-term memory can hold 5 to 9 items of information. So just keep rehearsing the first 5 or 6 options, like, okay, A, B, D, A, C, or whatever the answers are. And as you're continuously repeating that to yourself, the minute that the VCAA supervisor says start writing, you can quickly shade those bubbles in and maybe get like a teeny tiny, like 1 minute, 1.5 minute head start on time. And that'll make you feel good and give you more confidence as well, psychologically. Okay, so that's probably a good thing to maximize on, the capacity of our short-term memory there. Okay, so that's some tips for reading time. What are some tips for writing time? Is this kind of similar to the VCAA exam tips that we've already talked about in the first slide? But during writing time, just make sure you're highlighting or underlining any key words in the question. We know that throughout the year, some of the reasons why some people have lost marks in the SACs is because they haven't read the question properly. So if the question asks them to maybe provide 2 risk factors for mental disorder, they've only provided 1. Okay, if the question has asked students to provide limitation, they've only described the concept. They haven't provided the limitation as well. So underline any keywords in the question that you think are important or that you think you might otherwise miss out on. Also try to underline or highlight the question command term. We know that if a question asks us to explain something, it's a little bit different from if we're asked to evaluate compared to if we're asked to differentiate, for example. So just highlight that question command term. So you're doing or you're framing your answer in a way that's similar to what VCAA would want. The second point is not compulsory. It's not like you'll lose marks for not doing this, but if you've got certain keywords that you're discussing in your answer, it's a good idea if you'd like to underline those or highlight those. For example, if the question is about sources of stress and it's like a 4-marker and you have to maybe describe or explain 2 sources of stress, you might underline life events in your answer. You might underline daily pressures. You don't have to do this, but it's just something you might want to do formatting wise. You won't lose marks if you don't do it though. Make sure you don't leave any multiple choice questions blank. This is a really, really important point because as you might know, the multiple choice questions are marked through a computer, it's not a real human being that actually marks them. So they're literally fed through a computer scanner, and the computer scanner marks that, basically detects where the answers are, which bubbles have been shaded, and marks you accordingly. That's why you can't shade 2 bubbles. For example, for question 2, you've got A, B, C, D. If you shade 2 bubbles like this, or if you shade, for example, question A or option A, and then you go and shade option D, but you don't rub out option A, the computer will detect this as 2 answers and give you a 0. Okay, that's why we have to be really careful with this idea that we need to use a grey lid first of all, and that if we decide to change an answer for one of the multiple choice questions, that answer needs to be completely empty, okay, before we actually go and shade the other one. Otherwise, the computer will detect 2 answers there. Another thing that's really important to remember is that if I, for example, decide to leave question 2 blank, I'm like, okay, I'm going to leave question 2 blank, and then I go to the next question, question 3, and then I'm like, okay, question 3 is D, but rather than putting that here, I put question 3D answer in question 2. Well, what's going to happen to the rest of my answers? Every other answer is going to be wrong. This actually happened one year to a student, and it's what is called as the misalignment error, which is where you leave 1 blank and then you fill in the next question's answer in the previous question, and it basically leads to every other question becoming incorrect. So be careful. Don't leave any of your MCQs blank. Take your best guess and just make sure you fill a bubble for each one, okay, to avoid this from happening. Okay, we don't want to if you're alignment errors.
Can I add, Ms. Fedwin?
Yes, Ms. B.
With the multiple choice, if you do want to leave a question blank because you don't know and you want to come back to it, what I used to do is I used to put an arrow at the front of it, and that way I knew that there was like I haven't filled, that should be blank, and there's an arrow there. And then later when I'm looking at my answer sheet, I can go back and I know, hang on a minute, question 2, I haven't answered, and this is the time at the end. Well, let's say I've got 3 minutes left and I've got 20 multiple choice questions blank. You randomly circle because you've got 1 in 4 chance of getting it right, then not. Yep. So if you're going to do that to save yourself the time and to maybe even spare yourself getting things wrong because you don't want to take that initial guess and you want to leave it till the end, put an arrow at the front of it. It gives you an indication that you haven't answered that. And when you look at it, it should be blank. That's why there's an arrow. Yep. Always use pencil, guys.
Yeah,
you can't rub pen out, and you're not allowed to use liquid paper.
Yes, exactly. Liquid paper is a prohibited item. You should not be bringing liquid paper.
You're not allowed to have it with you. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So you should not just put a line over. If you've done something in short answer, you can put a line over it and write, but you cannot use liquid paper. Definitely cannot use liquid paper in multiple choice because you should be using a pencil, specifically a 2B pencil. So it's nice and dark. So whatever you circle, the scanner can pick up. That's the reason they ask you to use the 2B rather than the HB. Okay. But at this point, honestly, even HB is fine as long as you shade that darkly enough, and always make sure there's 1 bubble shaded for each question, not 2 or not multiple ones. Okay, just be careful there.
So logically, if you're going to bring a pencil, what else would you bring? There's 2 other items that come with a pencil?
Blue or black pen, and eraser and a highlighter and a ruler. You can bring
a sharpener.
Sharpeners, yeah. I think
right, because if you actually, yeah, if you don't and your pencil breaks, you're going to have to waste time asking. Yes. Outside in 1 minute. You're going to have to waste your time asking for. You're going to have to waste your time asking the examiner.
Yeah.
Waste your time with the examiner trying to get a pencil or a eraser or whatever.
Yeah, correct.
So make sure that you do that. Sorry, guys.
Yes. No, that makes sense, B. That's correct, because like you obviously want to make sure. Look, when I did my exam, and I think Miss B is the same because she's more organized than me. I brought in probably like 6 or 7 grey lids, even though realistically I wouldn't have to have used that many. But I was like over preparing. So it doesn't matter if you over prepare, even if you bring the whole office works, it's fine. Just make sure you bring it in a clear pencil case so that your pencil case doesn't get confiscated, or a clear bag where they can clearly see its contents. Okay, but yeah, be over prepared rather than under prepared. Bring anything that is allowed. If you look at your VCAA past exam front covers, whatever's allowed there, bring it. You think you might not need a highlighter, maybe at the last minute you want one or you want to use one. So just bring anything that you think you will use. Okay. What else do we, oh yeah, so on that note of not leaving questions blank, don't leave any question completely blank. Look, even the hardest question that you encounter, you can still write something for that. You can muster up some idea there and write something for it. If you write something there, there's a chance that you can at least get 1 mark. But if you write nothing there, well, you're always going to get nothing. Okay, so just make sure that you try your best. Look, VCAA are not going to, you know, they don't even know you. They just see you as a student number. So if you write something and make something up, what you think is ridiculous might not be as ridiculous as you think. You might get a mark for it. And remember, you're not marked now against our class alone, you're marked against the whole state. That question could have been hard for everyone in the state, but maybe it could have been that some people wrote something and that would have led them to at least get 1 mark there. Okay, so just always write something, even if the question seems hard. Give it a guess. With short answer questions, when you're thinking about what you're going to write, look at the mark allocation as well as the space given. If it's a 2-mark question and it's got like 4 lines, you don't have to write an essay. Okay, if it's obviously a 4-mark question, you're given more lines, you have to write more. Okay, so use your kind of like knowledge of the mark allocation and the space given to determine how much you're going to write, rather than starting a 2-marker and then realizing you haven't even got to the point and you're wasting time. Okay, so that's basically what you need to include. Also look at how many. Sometimes VCAA specify to identify 1 factor or to talk about 2 ethical issues that were breached in Little Albert experiment. So sometimes they give you numbers. If you don't satisfy those numbers in terms of how many examples they want or how many points they want you to talk about, you're not going to get the full marks. Similarly, if they ask you, for example, for 2 points and then you talk about 3, like let's say the question was evaluate the Little Albert experiment in terms of 2 ethical violations, and you've mentioned withdrawal rights and you've mentioned informed consent, and then you've also mentioned debriefing. Now, because VCAA only asks for 2, they're going to mark your withdrawal rights, they're going to mark your informed consent, but they're not even going to look at your 3rd point. So don't bother writing down a 3rd point there, because they're not going to look at that. Okay, they're not going to be like, oh, she got the 1st one wrong, but the 3rd one was correct, so she still gets full marks. Now, that's not how it works. So just make sure you don't waste extra time, because we've noticed this in the SACs this year. Sometimes if we ask for 2, you guys mention like 4 or 5 points there. But again, you don't get extra marks for mentioning more than what's required. So just maximize your time, in other words. Okay, and any questions? Can we bring rulers? Yes, you can bring rulers. Bringing rulers is not an issue. So you can bring rulers, particularly if you want to, if they give you a graph kind of question, or if you want to interpret a graph that they've given to you or printed for you and you want to align and see what the exact percentage or something is, you can use a ruler for that. So yeah, rulers are totally fine. Okay, as you're responding to questions in the exam, keep looking back to the question as you're writing, just to make sure you haven't gone off track or you haven't confused something. You know, sometimes you might start writing an answer to the question, and instead of writing the somatic nervous system, you start writing sympathetic by accident because of the nerves or the anxiety you have. So keep looking back to the question to see what you're writing and to make sure that you're not going off track or that you haven't confused one topic with another topic. We've said this all year, but for scenario case study based questions, you have to link back to the scenario. If the question is asking you about how cumulative risk applies to Lisa's situation, you need to link back to Lisa. Okay, you can give a definition of what cumulative risk is, but you still need to link it back to her. Okay, so that's really important. Don't stress too much. I know that the exam's on Monday and now is the time to start stressing, but you stress is okay. But look, we don't want to be distressing. I know most of you have been working hard and have been doing practice questions, and you know, you've been working hard most of the year given the situations you guys have been in this year as well. So just have faith in yourself and just have faith in the fact that at the end of the day, we can only do our best, you know, at the end of the day. So whatever you've studied hopefully should be something that you can put back into that exam on Monday. Okay, if we have time and we waffle even more on the 10 markers, we lose marks. Look, if you have time and you start waffling on the 10-mark question, you're not going to lose marks. VCAA are generally obligated to read. As long as you put an answer there, they have to read it. So
that question's marked holistically. So
yes,
they do have to read every single thing you wrote.
Yeah.
But don't annoy the examiners by waffling on.
Yes.
So
and don't write, please give me extra marks.
Yeah, don't. And also with the 10 marker, you've got to, this is why we say to you during reading time, plan it, because it should flow. When you're reading something and you're marking it holistically, you're looking for certain key terms and certain concepts that need to be discussed, but you're also reading it as a flowing, I guess, mini essay.
Yeah.
So if you're just going to sit there and write just dot points, it's not going to flow as well as if you'd actually structured it. Yeah. So you won't score as highly as somebody who's done that.
And look, that doesn't mean you have to use fancy terminology or start bringing in things like, fancy conclusions and opening sentences, but just answer whatever the question is asking you. Do it in a clear way with clear, continuous sentences that basically flow, okay, that have some kind of structure there. Okay, you don't have to use big words or big vocabulary and things like that, but I think there are marks allocated to things like structure and formatting. So if you're just writing plain old dot points the whole way through, you're not going to fail, but you're not essentially going to get a higher level mark there either. Okay, so just be careful there with the 10 marker and just see how you can go. Just try your best on that one. Look, generally across the state, we know that people don't generally perform well in the 10 marker. The average has never been more than, I guess, like 4 out of 10. So just try your best and know that what you write is probably better than what most people don't even get to the 10 marker because of time. So if you get to the 10 marker, I think that in itself is an achievement in itself. So just try your best there. Okay, don't think of the 10 marker as one big 10 mark, like, one big question. Break it down into the different subheadings or the different components of the question. Turn those components of the question into subheadings and then work on it in chunks rather than looking at it like this big mountainous task that's going to make you feel more anxious or more panicked. Okay, what else have I written here? Make sure you proofread your exam, or at the least, if time does not permit. And look, honestly, like guys, I'm not trying to scare anyone here, but honestly, time may not permit. Okay, when I did my exam many years ago, I finished writing about 2 minutes to go from like when 2 minutes to go before the exam ended. I didn't even have 2 minutes, I think, to actually quickly just flip through my exams. I couldn't do a detailed proofreading of my exam. No way. I was only able to kind of flip through, make sure I hadn't missed any questions or any pages. That's all I was able to do. If that's all you're able to do, don't beat yourself up about it, because honestly, that's the reality of it. But just try to at least make sure you haven't missed a page or missed a question there. That's the main thing. And again, you haven't missed a multiple choice question as well. So just going back, like Ms. B said before, going back to those questions, you might have put an arrow next to, filling those in before writing time is up. After the exam, try not to get caught up discussing answers with other people, or, you know, saying, oh, VCAA are going to mark it like this. VCAA, we never really know how VCAA are going to mark a question at the end of the day. So there's no point of really stressing about it in advance. Just, you know, give yourself a pat on the back that you're done with the exam and then move on to your next subject, okay? Don't stress yourself or beat yourself up about it. And finally, if you really, really struggled on a question, the chances are the rest of the state did too. I remember like when there were really weird questions that me and Miss B went, what was that? Or when the students in the previous years went, what was that? When the actual assessor's report came out, we realized that the average mark for that question was like 0.7 out of 4, or that it was like really low. So what the questions that you guys think are odd or like, you know, kind of random or that are really difficult or confusing, the rest of the state are likely going to think that as well. And again, that will kind of determine the whole scaling of the subject, the whole marking of the exam as well. So you don't need to stress or beat yourself up about it. Okay, I think, was there anything else you had to talk about? No, that's all. So yeah, all the best for your exam. Your exam's on Monday morning. So make sure that
yes, good luck, guys.
Yeah, all the best. And if you have any questions, just feel free to email me or Miss B. And yeah, we can help you guys out there. So I think I'll stop the recording here.